Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Mighty Blaze. The blaze was sparked when COVID-19 extinguished the traditional in-person book tour. Our New York Times bestselling authors and co-founders Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt joined forces to promote the new books coming out. Welcome to Lit Fic. I am Bo Ellis. I am a social media director at The Blaze, a writer myself, and also a producer at The Blaze. And today we welcome Ann Garvin. Dr. Ann Garvin is the USA Today bestselling author of 5 funny and sad novels. She writes about people who do too much in a world that asks too much of them. Ann worked as an RN after receiving her PhD and taught exercise physiology, sports psychology, nutrition, stress management, and global health for 30 years in the University of Wisconsin system. And she currently teaches creative writing at Drexel University with their low residency Master of Fine Arts programs. She's done a lot more. One of the amazing things I do want to bring up is Anne founded the multiple award-winning Tall Poppy Writers, which is an amazing organization I recommend you look up as soon as you can. It is committed to helping women writers succeed, which is an amazing cause. So hi, Anne. Thank you for being on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me today. It's so nice to be here.
Yes. How has your tour been, or when is that getting started?
It's starting a little bit today because there's quite a lot of people on Instagram that are going to be helping me out a little bit and talking about the book. But I have it starts Friday, and I'm doing some bookseller events and things like that. But it's a pretty low key tour. Like today, I'm getting my hair cut. So
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's important. You have to have the hair look as best as it can. And I know you have curly hair, so like me, I'm sure you understand that it's kind of up to the will. It has its own will when it comes to how it looks.
Yeah, I feel like with the minute you meet another curly person, you want to talk about what goop you use in your hair. And then the conversation might go on from that, but it could be just an hour of goop talk.
Yes, there's just so many options.
There's so many options.
But okay. Yes. I also wanted to ask, your career is just very multifaceted, from having a PhD in a kind of unrelated field to going to publishing 5 novels and founding Tall Poppy Writers. So what sort of took you in those directions?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question. And I think my answer changes all the time when I start to think about like how I went from one thing to another. But I was always a reader, but I wasn't always a writer. But the more I started to find voices that were a little bit funny and a little bit sad like mine, I started to think, maybe that's something I could do. But I never had any book ideas or anything like that until I entered a contest in 2004. And the contest was a 24-hour contest, and they sent you a piece of art. Like they sent everybody in the contest one picture, and you had to write a story about it and get it in. And that was the first time I thought, writing a book is like imagining scenes in your head and talking about those scenes based on what the characters are doing in that scene. And I thought, oh, that's what it is. Like I thought it was, I'm sure I thought like many people think, oh, you have a book idea and you just write it from start to finish, And yeah. I really had no sort of sense. I didn't know any authors. I didn't know anything really about storytelling except for teaching is storytelling, which I did do for a long time, but it's a different kind of storytelling. So once I won that, I won second place in that contest. And then I started thinking, oh, maybe this is something I could do on the side. And then I just started to sort of teach myself how to write books. Yeah.
That's really fantastic. And that's something I found when talking to a lot of other writers, especially people who maybe don't start, there's always those stories of like, I've been writing since I was 5 years old and I always knew it was my dream. A lot of us don't have that story. So I always love talking to people and how you have that moment where you're like, oh, I don't have to be that person who knew I was a writer at 5, and it's not this magical gift bestowed to you by the universe. I can just choose to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Like you get a little bit of, you get some positive feedback and you think, oh, maybe that's an area that I can go to. And I think I've often, I tend to go towards things and people that I admire. And I've always admired writers. And I thought, oh, I wonder if that's something that I can do in my lifetime. I wonder if it's a challenge that I could move towards. So I think it was like a lot of things. It wasn't really about a career change until it became about a career change, Yeah, so it's just really fun.
Yeah.
I'm so lucky.
Yeah. I think that is a really great career path to take. And I love that you've been able to switch totally to it, because that's awesome as well.
Yeah.
But this is the book. There's no coming back from this, which is really good. I wanted to ask, of course, a few questions about this. One of them, this might be a silly question, but the lead character of this book is Poppy Lively, which is an amazing name that gets her a lot of questions when people hear it in the book. I was wondering if Tall Poppy Writers, that name, if it inspired it, because I know the phrase tall poppy.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I am sure it popped. It sounds funny, but it popped out. And I thought, I love the name Poppy Lively. Of course, poppies are always on top of mind for me because of the Tall Poppy Writers. And also the idea that we cut down, successful people because of jealousy or envy. And we think we live in a scarcity society. So we always think, oh, there's only room for one person at the top. So I think that all of that played into how the character came out. I wish I had been a little bit more creative, that I wasn't like, oh, Poppy, that's a good name. It happens to be the name of your business. Like, it seems so silly and transparent. But also I like the idea of it being very sort of overt, which is in some ways the way we are in the Midwest. We are, like, I always say the Midwest are sort of the country's labradoodles. Like, we're so cheerful and we're happy and we're so glad to meet you. And so I wanted a name that sort of put all of that together. And so it sort of made sense. And I didn't fight with myself too much on it.
Yeah. I am also a Midwesterner. For those watching, I'm from Nebraska. So I can agree with that assessment. It's definitely... It's its own culture in the Midwest.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Yeah.
And I loved, in There's No Coming Back from This, there's a bit of a culture clash when Poppy Lively goes from her Midwest home to LA to work on a movie set. And I did want to ask, why did you pick a movie set for this book? She works in the Vanities, which is makeup and hair and costuming.
Well, the funny thing about this is I often like to write about when people are enclosed in a space and what happens when they're enclosed in a space somehow, whether it's in their own little world or a movie set or something like that. And because I think that we change a lot based on who we're around and how we adapt to that space. But to be honest, the idea of the movie thing I was writing a different book and I had a throwaway joke in there that there was a character who had all of her money from being a costumer on a remake of When Harry Met Sally, but with dogs. Like, it was a joke. It was a throwaway. And then when I needed an idea for a book, I thought about that and I thought, oh my God, that'd be the funniest setup for a book about a Midwesterner who ends up in the Shark Tank of LA. And so that's kind of how it didn't come. I wasn't like, oh, I think I'm going to write about movies. It was more like I came in the back door of that idea.
Yeah. No. And I do love the idea of a dog remake of When Harry Met Sally. I feel like they should maybe contact you about making that a real script.
I mean, I hope they never remake any of Nora Ephron's rom-coms unless they do it with dogs. And then it would be okay with me.
Yes. I myself have actually worked in the costuming, the Vanities department on film sets, some bigger, some smaller. And I felt that you really captured the energy of them well. I also loved, you describe a lot how Poppy, how it's like, it's hard, it's very hurry up and wait and hectic, but it's really nice because you just tangibly see what you did, you see how it impacts it, and it's very satisfying to just do something and see the immediate results, which I found I really agree with. What research did you did to get that vibe kind of correct?
You know, I was so lucky because I knew I go to LA frequently because I don't like winters so much. And I have a lot of friends there. And so when I pitched this idea sort of on a whim, and they said, yeah, you should write that, I really had to get going on the research because I didn't know anything about it at all.
Mhm.
And so I spread the word and I said, I need a costumer. I need to talk to some people. Does anybody know anybody? And my really good friend had a woman that lived across the street that had just retired from set costuming
Mm.
for after 30 years. Like she'd won Emmys, she'd work on all the big films like Hidden Creatures and all of Adam Sandler's films and King Richard. And, you know, so she was so amazing. She gave me hours of her time and took me on set to Universal Studios more than once and Sony Studios. And I was in the costume cages. I was on all the sets. It was
Mm.
amazing. So I spent days and days and days with her. And then she set me up with other costumers and I had them on the phone and we went to lunch together. And I really, in fact, for a while, I was like, I'm going to be a costumer now. Like I really, I just wanted to be them so
Yeah.
badly. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. It is a nice job, and it is a job you can honestly learn on the job, as Poppy has to, since costuming is not her area of expertise.
No, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you? That is nice that you were able to actually be on the sets of Universal Studios.
Yeah.
So is what you described pretty one-to-one for it, or did you take a few creative liberties with?
The only creative liberty that I took was that they don't have an iconic costume vault anywhere. They don't have a place where they save the most famous costumes and hold them out for, you know, the future in any way. So
Yeah.
you can walk through these enormous warehouses with clothing everywhere. And it's possible to pull an item off the rack and have Mickey Rooney's name in it, or you know, like Clark Gable's name in it because they
Mm-hmm.
don't save those out. They just put them right back in and use them again for other films. And so that I did, there is a space in the book about that where there's like an iconic spot, but there isn't that. So other than that, I maybe collapsed the mileage around the place a little bit, but not really. I pretty much, in fact, I made a map of it. So that, let me see if I made a map of the whole thing that sometimes I like send out
That's
to
so cool.
readers. Yeah, so that they can see like where she
Mhm.
was mostly and where the costumer is, how much, because she does a lot of running around in this book.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Which is a lot of fun. I mean, running around is necessary on a film set in general, but Poppy also has some very extra things that happen.
She does.
And I really liked the relationship between Three and Poppy. Not that I thought it was a good relationship, but I loved how you described that kind of relationship where you're very taken in by somebody and you're very charmed by them, that you sometimes don't always look at what the red flags are. What sort of inspired your?
You know, I definitely have been in contact with that kind of person. I think we all have, you know, the charismatic person that maybe doesn't have as much to them as you think they do.
Mhm.
Somebody that, you know, maybe is definitely enticing, and very hard to see whether they are sincere or not. And
Mhm.
I think that I pulled from anybody I've known where after I've spent a little time with them, I've discovered that. And I can't remember whether this line is in the book or not, or where I read this, but I remember someone saying at some point you have to forget what you think about someone and just pay attention to how they make you feel. And because a charismatic person can, you know, or someone that maybe is a little bit of a narcissist can make you feel amazing at first and then be roughed. Like, and
Mhm.
you look at them and you're like, why do I feel that way? They're so smart and funny and they're so charming and lovely. But then after a while, that feels like it's only for them. So they
Yeah.
forget to call you, or they break a date, or they break a
Mhm.
phone message, or they don't show up when they say they're going to show up. And all of that feels yucky. But I think that you can get very starry eyed about someone because it's like, it's like a glittery accessory. It's very easy to fall in love.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
No.
I tried
Yeah.
to kind of show how, especially in Hollywood, that's a very common thing, I think. So I wanted to highlight
Mhm.
it. And it's a really big juxtaposition to who Poppy is, because Poppy is really a person of substance, even though she's not sure herself that she is that. Uh,
Mhm.
because she recognizes that she's not as glittery as people around her.
Yeah.
And she believes it, So I really wanted to show that contrast between those two people.
I really love that because I love so many women, as you show in your novel, and I'm sure all your novels. So many women are made to feel like they have to be the glitteriest specialist thing in the world just to have any worth. And Poppy is not the most glamorous person, and
Mhm.
yet has a lot more honesty and value than several other people on this
Yeah,
set in the novel, which
yeah.
I loved her kind of realizing that and coming into her own.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the message is always you're number two or less for women. I think we've all grown up in that framework where,
Mhm.
there's a lot of insults. Like I think about the coaches on a soccer field with boys and they're saying, come on, ladies, let's get moving. And it's an insult, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that, it's supposed to be a joke. It's all, silly, but the message there is that we're less than. And,
Yes.
unless we have a very strong resume or look a certain way, we're often, we're like, oh, well, she's a woman, but she's these things too. So that gives her, value. And that kind of thing makes me absolutely crazy. So I do write about it a fair amount because it's something that
Yeah.
I think it hits home for most women.
No, and I've definitely had that experience where a lot of people who meet me will be like, you're actually smart. And I'm like, well, why are you saying it like you just expected I wouldn't be?
Yeah, right. I heard this phrase the other day from a therapist who said, she said, a good comment when someone says something like that to you is like, oh, are you saying that to support me or to hurt me?
Yeah.
And I just love that phrase because I think that really puts it right back into the person to have to think about what it is they just said to you and why they said it.
hmm
You know,
Yeah, that is a good way to kind of reflect that back. Because sometimes I think people are just saying things without thinking at all,
yeah,
which is something we're all guilty of. But
absolutely. Yeah. But I think that some people would be like, oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to say it that way. And other people might get defensive. And that tells you a little bit about both people.
hmm And I did really love you have a really great way of writing people. Another relationship I wanted to ask about is the one between Poppy and her mother Gemini, who, despite not physically being in the story, Gemini is kind of all over the story. And
Yeah.
what sort of inspired this specific mother daughter relationship? Because it's one you don't see often where a mother has sort of left the family completely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really easy to stereotype female behavior as either a good mother or a bad mother. And we're all a product of not just our parents, but also the culture that we live in and also the community that we live in. And I think it's very easy to decide that um unless you're acting exactly as the culture sort of prescribes, that we can then blame everything on that mother. Mothers get a lot of that, right? And so I think, in an early rendition of this book, there was some comments about, creating that person as the primary core wound. But I wanted to make sure that it wasn't her mother's relationship, even though she left, that was the core wound of Poppy, that it came from a different place. And so, I think that we got women, moms, and we get shoved into these spaces of what's okay and what's not okay. And we know darn well that there isn't a rule for that. We know there is. And so I wanted to push against that a little bit so that people might say, well, I might not feel that way, but I can see how she did feel that way,
Yes, and I do agree. I'm not a mother myself, but of course I have one. I have a lot of friends who are mothers, and watching the way it feels like they can't breathe without somebody being like, aren't you a terrible mom for doing that to your baby? So I can't imagine the stress that it puts them under.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to show a woman that, didn't make a choice that people would agree with. And I wanted to see how that landed. And I wanted to see, write a character that maybe landed differently after that reaction,
Yes, which I really loved, coming to understand Gemini more as Poppy sort of comes to understand Gemini a little more over the course of the novel.
Yeah.
Another thing, I sort of wanted to ask about your research on the IRS, because the IRS is a huge problem for Poppy in this book. That is why she ends up needing to go to LA in the first place. That all of her assets have been seized due to tax issues, which sounds way scarier than almost everything else. But
Oh, it does, doesn't it? I know. I had someone text me today and say all the tax stuff is giving me so much anxiety.
Yeah.
I know. Well, it happened to my friend. And yep. And she gave me chapter and verse about it. And so I was able to really glean a lot of information from her about what happens when something like this occurs. And also, how unforgiving it can be in a lot of different situations. But it's so funny because I do read reviews, and I don't read them all. And sometimes I read them like with one eye closed, so I don't get ruined. But a lot of people are they're funny because a lot of people are offering better tax information in their reviews, which I kind of love because it means they really invested in the information. But yeah, I mean, the IRS, they always say death and taxes. And I also think some of the worst criminals that we've ever sort of experienced often are fallen from taxes, that we get them with their taxes problems. So, yeah, it's an immovable force. And I had needed an immovable force to really get her out of her house, to move her all the way to LA. It had to be scary.
Oh, yes. And that is, no, I agree with those reviewers that the tax stuff was very scary. And I love that people are sharing helpful tax information.
So. I love it too. It's so cute. I know. I love it. They're like, I think that she should have had a better lawyer. I'm like, okay. Me too.
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice if everybody could afford a great lawyer who would be the best one. But and when you're not expecting and you don't know how to look for a lawyer, it's easy to not have the best one.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. I did, and Trisha, our amazing producer today, put up one of the quotes that I found that you write about people who do too much in a world that asks too much of them. And I wanted to ask, what does that mean for you? I mean, why is that who you write about?
Yeah, I love to write about just normal people like you and me who get shoved to the edge. Like I'm so interested in people who get sort of their worst nightmare happened to them, and then they are forced to find their way out of it. I don't want to write about superheroes. I don't want to write about people with special powers, even though I love those books. Those fantasy books are amazing. I think I really get drawn into them and want to read them forever. But I think there is a lot of power and a lot of humor when you take just a normal person with normal coping skills and you push them to their absolute limit, because I think that's when you get both the humanity, but also the humor, and humor is tied to sadness. And so, like, for example, if it doesn't take much really to push a person to the edge. I mean, I've been pushed to the edge of my patience when I,
Yeah.
put my mitten in the car door and it gets pulled off my hand, like, it doesn't take much.
Yeah.
And so the comedy happens quickly. And I love to highlight, rather than the incredible anger and impatience, I like to highlight the humanity, because I think that that's really funny. And I also think that if you highlight that, it makes people feel better about having flaws. And that's my whole goal. I want people, when they read my books, to think, oh my God, that's exactly what would happen to me. I'm so uncool. And that makes me laugh. And it makes me, like, I've done a lot of embarrassing things and in my life. And I've said a lot of embarrassing things. And I kind of want other people to know it so they feel better when they also do embarrassing things. I think that's probably the nurse in me. So I write about anybody that is asked to do too much. And I think that's all of us. We're all asked to do too much all the time. That's a long answer for that question. I don't even know if I got to it.
Yeah, I know. I think you did. And I think that is a great point, because I did find many experiences of Poppy I could relate to, especially when she helps dress an actor, and working in costuming, I've done that too. And it is always that very uncomfortable thing where you're like, this is so weirdly intimate with someone who I barely know. And I'm helping them get dressed. And it's always part of me was like, am I supposed to be doing this? Are they going to like laugh at me when I get back and be like, oh my God, you helped them put a shirt on?
Yes.
Do you think they're a kid?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Exactly. And the minute you get into a fish out of water situation, you're not the strong person you thought you were going to be, and then you don't have those tools anymore. And that can be just very funny. It can just be very funny as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a great fact from Trish. The costuming department is full of 1 million people, which is partially how Poppy slides in. She's not a fashion designer or an amazing sewer or tailor. She can sew a button and not much else, which is, I mean, sewing buttons is about half of what you do when you're a costume runner. But I love showing that kind of, there's a lot of warmth on a film set, but it's also a very cutthroat environment at the same time, because people, they want to keep their job. It's a very precarious job to work on a film set, because you can get cut without notice, as is discussed in this book. But you love the people you work with. How did you sort of strike that balance of showing that warmth, that love, while it's also like this undercurrent of just fear and anxiety?
Yeah, well, for one thing, the costumers that I met were they were just like normal people. Like you would never have, at first I was like worried that I would meet them and they'd be so stylish and I would be slopping in there from the Midwest with my, used t-shirts and stuff. But they were just like normal people, and they were so warm and lovely to me that I got to thinking about, wow, these people, they're no different than us. Like, they are so lovely, but they're working with these stars who are both confident and insecure, and they also know that they could get cut at any moment. So there is this general feeling of fear all the time, and urgency in terms of time and not wasting anything. And everybody is, like, I think the writer's strike has shown us a lot of information about the people that are making this work are people that are getting hourly pay. And so they're not making so much money that they could lose a job and it would be okay. They're just like the rest of us. And so it was, again, it was just a great way. It was another sort of look at humanity and how we're always right on the verge of maybe losing it on one day and then but feeling like we're killing it on another. And I think there's just a lot of emotions, big feelings that come with both of those things. So it wasn't that hard because I just tapped into people. I kind of know people, Yeah.
I do love that you mentioned that, because I do think, as someone who works on film sets, and people sometimes get surprised by that you think it's this ultra glamorous world where like everybody shows up on set and they're all like the actors, which even actors I know a lot of who aren't maybe what people are imagining when they think of an actor. But it really is just regular people who have a tough time. And yes, that is why I'm supporting that strike in every way I can, because I know a lot of people who are affected by it, and I want them to have better conditions because everybody deserves that.
Yeah, they really do deserve that. And, some of the studio heads probably need to cut their wages a little bit so that those people can live. I mean, they'd have nothing if it weren't for the writers.
Yes. I mean,
ChatGPT is not going to take it. I mean, it's just not going to. Not yet.
So. I don't know if it will. I don't know if we can get there anytime soon with it writing the same humanity a person can have.
I think it would be. I mean, I'm hoping. I don't know what to say except that I hope it doesn't happen in my time frame, because I think humans, we serve a purpose, and I think our goal to connect will be limited if we rely on these automated ways. And I'm just so hopeful that we get to keep our humanity here.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and that I think is the crux of the issue. And not to totally tone shift, but one other character who I really loved, I wanted to ask about why you picked to include them, because they were quite odd to have on the film set, which is, of course, Kevin, who is a adorable sounding little dog, old lady dog.
Yeah, to me, Kevin is the mirror of Poppy. And the fact that she is so unassuming and also a fish out of water, I just thought there was no better way to really put a exclamation point on that than to strap the most awkward of all dogs onto her and make her the babysitter of that dog. And I really wasn't. It's funny though, because I wasn't quite sure what his role would be. So in the end, he surprised me. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to ruin anything. But his role, when I realized what his role was going to be, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so great. Like I had so much joy for my own little mind there. Because I wasn't quite sure. I didn't want him to just be a device. I wanted him to be something kind of amazing in it. And it started out just, and really it sort of ended up the same, that those two were sort of the same all the way through. And he was kind of a, I don't know, like an external view of her heart,
Yeah, absolutely. Which I loved Kevin. I loved the description. I love dogs too.
The washcloth, the dog. I like he's the washcloth. Yeah.
No, that was amazing to me. I also think we'll take some audience questions now if we have them, Trish.
Okay.
But while Trish is throwing that up there, you guys can check out Peanut, who is Anne's puppy, which sounds super adorable.
I wonder if I can, he's sitting right here, and I wonder if he'll come out and visit, because I keep him in his case right here because he'll bark at other dogs during interviews. But come on, buddy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he's with Steve. Now he's not sure.
Oh. But for our audience question, how do you manage to keep the tone light and fun when writing about difficult topics? Which is a fantastic question.
Yeah, that is a good question. And the thing is that I think about everything is funny. I mean, I know that not everything is funny, but when everything strikes me as a little bit funny and sad, because those two things are connected. Like you can't really have funny unless you also have sad. Those two are attached to each other, or sad and embarrassment, or sort of funny as a surprise. And I, whenever I view something, typically, even as a nurse, I could come up with something kind of silly about it. And I really believe that 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 is what humanity is about. It's about our flaws, and flaws are always funny. Like every once in a while, like, and I hate some of that. I hate, like, if somebody falls over, I mean, my first impulse is to laugh, and then my second impulse is to go take care of them. But I tend to sort of think everything is a little bit funny. And maybe it's because I'm so uncomfortable with pain, or maybe it's just that I understand humanity and that's what it is. But the funny and light tone is kind of where I live in the world. I have tried to write just drama and I can't do it. And I've tried to write just funny and I can't do it. So I tend to sort of live in that space. Now, I also think that comes from a privilege of never having lost a child, or never having, some of the issues that other people have had that ruin your life. But I have had hard times, absolutely, some very difficult times. And even though I understand how hard those things are for me and my family, there's always something that I can grab onto that makes me laugh a little bit. So I think it's maybe who I am. I think it's maybe the way my brain is wired. Yeah.
I think that's honestly a good way to look at things, because I found it like the most stressful, sad moments of my life where in the moment I was not finding anything funny. I look back and I'm like, it was a little funny because that was a little ridiculous that literally all that was happening. Like just the fact that so many terrible things can happen sometimes feels funny in retrospect, because it's like,
yes,
why was all that happening?
exactly. I mean, there is always something. And I do think that some of that is, I think some of it is coping. When I was a nurse, I worked in the VA hospital in neuro and neurosurgery, and there's not a lot of funny stuff in there, but there's a lot. On the other hand, there is a lot of funny stuff in there. And I think that's how you cope with misery sometimes too. Yeah. So it doesn't hit you quite so hard, because you got to come back the next day. You got to come back,
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I have some friends who actually work in the medical field who have told me they have to have a similar outlook, and you
do, I think. And some of that optimism is a personality characteristic, certainly. And I'm probably a very optimistic person compared to, certainly people that are pessimists. So I think optimism is also associated pretty heavily with humor,
Yes, I think the ability to keep looking on the bright side, I mean, it's honestly a skill almost. Or maybe I'm naturally pessimistic, so to me it seems like a skill. Because I'm always the worst case scenario, and I'm always like, oh, I'm sure now another terrible thing will happen. And it's been a lot of work to try and train myself to stop doing that and setting myself up for bad things to happen to me.
Yeah. Or looking for those bad things, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, right. I understand that. Sure.
Yeah. Do we have other audience questions? Or why did you decide to pivot from healthcare, and will you pivot next to costuming?
I wish I could. I kind of wish I could pivot to costuming. If they called me up and said, we need somebody right now to run around on the set, I would totally do it. So when I was, I have to be honest, I was not the greatest nurse. You have to get the right meds to the right people every single time, and they are sticklers about it. And so I was I was really empathetic. I was kind to patients. I was great to them. But back in the day when I was a nurse, the amount of medications that I had to give was kind of numbing for me. And then nursing has changed quite a lot. And so I think I would like to be a nurse more than I did back then. And then I went into teaching, and teaching was a fantastic way for me to hone my storytelling skills and lecturing skills, so that when, if ever I was teaching something very difficult, I would tell the story of it rather than talk about whatever it is. Like I never talked about how breathing functions in the brain and in your external intercostals. I would tell the story of breathing instead. And once I realized that I enjoyed doing that, I started thinking maybe I could reach more people with my voice if I started writing fiction books. And so that's kind of how it happened. I just started thinking, I'm only in front of, these 20, 21-year-old students talking about physiology. What if I were able to tell other stories about humanity that changed people's mood and minds in another way, rather than just one-on-one patient care or a student in a lecture situation? And so that's kind of how I moved into writing.
Yeah, that's an amazing pathway. And I think you're a little frozen, at least to my screen. So, oh, you're back. Perfect.
Okay,
Only
great.
lasted a few seconds. But that is a beautiful way of looking at it. I actually, ironically, I worked at a healthcare college before I worked at my current job, which is at a local theater.
So different.
That focus, yeah.
Yeah.
And since this was a healthcare focused college, it didn't do traditional liberal arts degrees. It was only people doing nursing or radiology or physical therapy.
Sure.
It was a very different world to witness compared to my own schooling, and just seeing the amount of information they had to absorb very fast was
Right.
crazy thing to witness. And I admire all of them who got through it, because it wasn't easy for any of them, I know.
Yeah. No, it's tough for sure. It's a lot of loss. It's learning about loss, really. Yeah.
Yes. It was something where I was a residence hall director, so I lived with the students. I was very close with them, and having a student who I'd ask, be like, hey, you look kind of down today. Can you talk to me? Do you want to talk to me? And then they'd be like, I lost a patient. I was working in the ER and somebody was lost on my care, and I just don't know how to deal with it. And then trying to help them with this situation that I had never been in was quite the struggle.
Oh, I bet it was. I bet it was very difficult.
Yeah. And not to tone shift again, but I did want to ask, what are you working on next, if we are allowed to discuss it?
Yes, I am allowed to talk about it. I'm getting to the final bits on a draft for a book that is due in October that will come out next summer. And it's called, the story's about a man who has created a camp, like a summer camp for anxious and depressed adults. But he's sort of a poor man, Tony Robbins, and he's not good with money, and he didn't have enough money to hire professionals to take care of these people. So he hires anxious and depressed college students to do it instead. And the title of the book is called Bummer Camp. And the people at the camp have to save the camp with only the things that they have on hand at the camp. And a gala is going to be happening on camp, and they have to pull it all together to raise money to keep it going. So it's a lot of anxious and depressed people coming together.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I will definitely be looking out for that one.
It's fun. I'm so excited to write, because I started years ago, and now I'm finally getting to finish it.
Yes, Bummer Camp is also just an amazing title. That is definitely a title I'd see and pick it up and be like, okay, I have to know.
Yeah. God, I hope so. I love that. I love the idea of this book. I hope I can make it work.
I am sure you can. And this is the second to last question I always like to ask people, but is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about that you want to throw in now?
Let me think about that for a minute. Let me
Mhm.
see if there's anything in there that. No, I think probably what people will find when they read the book is a deep dive into Universal Studios in a way that maybe they haven't been able to see it. Like, because a lot of the stuff that they hang out on the steps of the old Psycho mansion, and they
Mhm.
are in, they're always on the set where all of the big iconic movies has been played. And so,
Mhm.
and that's the only thing you see for the most part. I mean, the most of the book is set in that, so you get to live in that space for a little while. And Poppy literally lives in that space for a little while.
Yes.
So not I think you asked so many good questions that I feel really good about it. Thank you.
No, thank you. I've loved this interview, and I did love this book, so talking about it was really fun. I love when it's unexpectedly you find a connection, like me with doing
Yeah,
costuming work and reading about somebody with costume getting thrown into costuming a little less prepared than I was when I got in.
yeah,
But
yeah. I know it's funny because ever since I finished the book, there's so many more people that have come out and said to me, "Oh, I used to work in that." And I think, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." So many people.
no, it's a really fun job. And if anybody is listening to this and thinks I would love to try that, I'm sure regardless of where you live, you don't have to live in LA. There are probably film productions happening that you could join in on, and you'll start very low level, but you can work up, or you can stay at low level if you just want something a little less commitment.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I think that's true. Yeah.
mhm. But yes. So, what are you doing next, and where can people find you?
Well, I mostly online, I have to say, although I have an event at Mystery to Me in Madison, Wisconsin. It's an independent bookstore on Monroe Street, and it's such a great place, and the owners are always so kind to me. And but that's the only real big bookstore event that I'm doing. Mostly I'm doing a lot of interviews online. So the best place to find that information is, I announce it in my Instagram and also on my website. If anybody's interested in another email coming into their email box, you can sign up for mine. I always write one essay of personal writing that no one's ever seen before, and then book news for other people, other authors, the tall poppy writers. And then if there's a retreat or something that I'm teaching at, the information for that is there so that people can join in if they're interested. But other than that, I mean, I think online is where you can find me the most.
Yes. And those links to Anne's website and social media are all in the comments. So if you would like to follow her more, which you absolutely should, definitely go to those links and follow her and keep up with all her book news and go run and buy There's No Coming Back from This Today because it came out today. So
Did
you
it
finally
came out
can.
today? Yes.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining us on LitFic, Anne, and thank you so much for all who are watching for joining us. The incredible Ann Garvin, author of There's No Coming Back for This. Remember to order this book, and also please like, follow, and subscribe for more blazing goodness and to meet more amazing authors like Anne.
And thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate this. What a
Yes,
fun
and
time.
also yes, and thank you to Trish for being our amazing producer today. But we will see you all soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.